Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Tell Show. My name's Isaiah Bell,
Barb Walter.
and we are here to discuss the things that we shouldn't be taking at face value. So today we're going to be diving into why Nazism in America is on the rise, but we're not seeing other groups that were around during different eras, like the Black Panthers, rising again.
Oh, so one of the things that Isaiah and I talked about when we were thinking about how we're going to structure this was, should he tell me what the questions are going to be or should he not? And Isaiah likes to prepare and I don't, which kind of drives him crazy, which I love. But anyway, give us your opinion. Do you like
The format
or not? Anyway, Nazism. Why are we seeing the rise of Nazism now, and not? Or let's talk about ideological extremism on the far right, and not something similar on the far left. Oh, that's an awesome question. So, there's actually a really good reason for this, and I think the way to think about it is, if you look historically over time and space, look at who tends to start these sorts of violent extremist or ideologically extreme movements. It's usually on the left. If it rises on the far left, it tends to be people who are oppressed, who are really poor. Think about the Chinese Civil War was, led by Mao. This was a peasant revolution. Think about the Russian Revolution. This was a peasant revolution. Think about the French Revolution. This was a peasant revolution. These are fine. It's like when finally the poor, downtrodden, abused masses pick up their pitchforks and start going, ee. That's the far left. When it happens on the far right, oh, by the way, I have my red wine again. I'm very happy. When it happens on the far right, it tends to be the group that had been dominant. It's the dominant privileged group that's in decline. And when a violent or an ideologically extreme movement emerges, it's usually that group, and they're targeting whatever groups are coming up, right? Which oftentimes are immigrants, right? So it's those groups that threaten this dominance, often demographically. And that's exactly what's happening in the United States today, right? If you're African, if you're a Black American, a Latino American, an Asian American, time is on your side, right? Your numbers are increasing, either because your birth rate is higher than the white birth rate, or immigration continues. So you just have to wait, and you will become more influential, because in a majoritarian system, a one person, one vote system, you're going to have more voters. In a system where if you're an immigrant from a group that has, high levels of education and graduate education and are going into big tech and are getting good jobs, your situation and your group situation is improving over time. But if you're the once dominant group, and as we talked last time, the group that had been privileged so that you really didn't have to compete historically, you could go to an Ivy League school because only white men were allowed to go to Ivy League schools. You would immediately get a job in an investment bank because, daddy had connections. You are not particularly well placed to compete in a world of really scrappy, hardworking immigrants who've gotten their engineering degrees and have come up through a system that was brutal and weeded out everybody but the best.
And well, I must say, they came up in a system that was built to keep them out. So they had to work that much harder to get in.
Exactly. So if you're in a situation where your group is declining and you're losing that dominant position and you're not able to really effectively compete, or many of you are not able to effectively compete, then a movement an anti-democratic movement, right? This system isn't working anymore. We don't, it's inefficient and it's not making America great. We need to have less democracy. That's good. Of course, you want less democracy because you can't compete in that system anymore.
Right.
So why is it happening now? It's happening now because demographically, the United States is in an enormous democratic transition. Nobody really likes to talk about this here in America. I don't exactly know why. We whites really are very uncomfortable talking about race. Like, we're in the middle of the biggest racial transformation in America's history.
Yeah.
In the next 20 years, we're going to go from being a white majority country to a white minority country. That is going to happen. Nobody's talking about this.
Mm-hmm.
And this is deeply, deeply unsettling and threatening to a subset of Americans. And so why are we seeing, the rise of far right groups? The domestic terrorist groups, are exponentially growing on the far right. There is some movement on the far left.
Mm-hmm.
It's less, but it's increasing, and we could talk about that. But most of the militias in the country that are growing, the violent extremist groups that are growing, are overwhelmingly on the far right. Most of them are white nationalists, white supremacist group.
Mm-hmm.
A few of them, some of them are anti-federal government groups, but about 75% of the violent extremist groups here in the United States are white supremacist groups. So we are seeing the pattern that we've seen historically in all sorts of other countries. And so it's happening because whites are in decline, and they're not going to go down without a fight. And that's what we're seeing today.
So what are the things that you're seeing that we should be sort of taking notice of? Because if these groups are able to accomplish their goal, I guess we would have to determine what that end goal is, that we might not be able to combat if we wait to a certain point and they are successful.
Right. So what they're trying to accomplish is what Viktor Orban, who's the president of Hungary, has accomplished over the last 15 plus years.
Mm-hmm.
So Hungary used to be a democracy. Hungary still has elections. Hungarians go out to vote. But the same party
Mm-hmm.
and the same person always win. Viktor Orban's Fidesz party and Viktor Orban are elected again and again and again. And why is that? It's because Orban and his party have rigged the system, and they've done a number of very specific things. The most important thing that they did was he gained control of the media environment.
Mm-hmm.
So it's now very, very hard for anybody who wants to run against Orban in an election to get their message out in any way. They essentially cannot campaign.
Mm.
And so the elections happen, and most Hungarians have never heard about the people who are running against Orban. And so they cannot get enough votes to beat him. So you control the media environment. The other thing you do is you basically intimidate any people who want to run against you into submission. So if you happen to get a really, really good candidate, that woman in Venezuela is the perfect example.
Or I'm just thinking also Alexei Navalny.
Navalny. Popular, charismatic, honorable, somebody who Russians absolutely were getting behind, or Venezuelans were getting behind. What was she won the Nobel Peace Prize.
Right.
Well, she won it.
She won it.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah, it is still hers. But she won the vote by a fairly large margin, and Maduro just basically said, "No, I'm not honoring it." But if you're a Maduro, or you're a Putin, or you're a Viktor Orban, and you're unlucky enough to face one of these very charismatic, very galvanizing candidates, then you have to try to get rid of them. And so what Putin did is he tried to poison Navalny, and he did, but Navalny didn't die.
Mm-hmm.
And
just so people know, he was able to get treatment outside of Russia, and decided that what the cause was so important to him that he was going to go back, knowing what he was going back into, knowing that they were going to try and kill him off, and still went because it was worth it
Yeah.
to try and have a democratic nation.
So Putin eventually imprisoned and then killed him. So the second thing you do, you control the media, and then you get rid of any potential opposition candidates. You kill them, poison them, scare, send them into exile, scare them into dropping out of the race. So you get rid of them. And then the third thing you do is you fix the elections, right? Mm-hmm. You try to, and you see all sorts of things. You see ballot stuffing, you see, the stealing of ballot boxes, you see...
Or even sowing doubt in the integrity of the election
yes,
itself.
Yes. You contest the election, you have, you then demand a recount, but then you bribe the people who are counting. I mean, there are all sorts of shenanigans that happen. But basically, you erase the results of the election and declare yourself a winner. So, again, what was the question? I need to make my answer shorter.
What is that we should be looking for? What are the signs that are going to say, okay, if these groups are successful, we will no longer be able to come back or combat them?
Yeah. So again, if you are the Republican Party and starting in the 60s made essentially a deal with the devil, which was when the Democrats signed the civil rights movement, basically they knew they were going to lose the solid white vote, which had historically voted for Democrats for no reason except that Lincoln had been a Republican. That's a whole other crazy ass story. Like you couldn't make up these stories. So Southern whites have always been much, much more conservative than the Democratic Party. It didn't matter. They still voted for the Democrats because for 100 years, because Lincoln was a Republican. But when Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act, bawdy, racist, Lyndon Johnson from Texas signed the Civil Rights Act, giving Black Americans full rights in the South where they didn't have those rights. He turned to his aide and he said, "We are handing the South over to the Republicans for generations." And of course, the Republican Party then gained all of these Southern white votes and catapulted them into winning elections that they hadn't won consistently before. So it was a huge boon for the Republican Party to gain the solid South of white voters. But the Democrats got rid of their long-term problem, which is in a demographically changing America, if you're saddled with lots of white voters who do not want a multicultural America and will basically do everything possible to prevent power being transferred beyond the white population, then you're going to have a harder time winning elections if America stayed a democracy. Democrats got rid of that problem. The Republicans took it on in the 60s. It served them very well, right? 60 plus years of winning elections has worked for them. But now they're sort of, they have to pay.
Yeah. The thing is, they won them because statistically they outnumbered the opposition.
They outnumbered the opposition. But increasingly that's not the case. And so now they have to figure out, okay, they can have democracy or they can have, this hardcore, passionate base of white voters, but they probably can't have them both. They probably can't have them both. And if you can't have them both, and you're not willing to reach across racial and religious lines, you're not willing to expand your tent truly to Latinos, to Muslims, to atheists, to Jews,
to Buddha, I was
to
going to say that's
Latinos,
to
if you're really not willing to open your tent, then the only other option is to start to try to create a Viktor Orban type system, which means you control the media, you go after opposition and threaten to jail them, and you suppress the vote and try to manipulate elections. And that's exactly what we're seeing here.
And I was just going to say, so we've already seen voter suppression.
Yes.
What was your other?
Controlling the media.
Controlling the media. I mean, we've got lawsuits that have forced people that have had extremely high ratings, that have been very successful on late night television. Jimmy Kimmel was pulled. Stephen Colbert is canceled. We are seeing that MSNBC is now MS Now
Bezos
because
just
killed the Washington
fired
Post.
30%
Yes.
of the Washington Post's, staff, including many, many distinguished Pulitzer Prize winning journalists.
This is one of those things that I think it's really difficult sometimes to have conversations where people don't feel like I'm being hyperbolic or I'm being an alarmist. And I'm like, really, if you look at the history of so many different nations and how they shifted drastically and quickly to an autocracy as opposed to a democracy, all the red flags are there. And I take that back, not quickly necessarily, but the signs are there. And I think for anyone who's looking for the signs, you see them. But for people who are just like, we have this thing in America where we have been taught history by the victors, and that history isn't necessarily the reality or the truth. And so we've also been taught to not challenge that history. And now we live in a world where political leaders can just choose what the truth is and sort of disseminate that across the media that they've essentially intimidated in a way that they are not going to push back on because the funders behind that don't want to have to go up against that. And so I guess I kind of just wonder, it's like, okay, how do we bring this to light in a way where it feels real, where the threat feels imminent? Because there are so many people who will say, we are so far from losing our democracy. We are so far from having a dictator. It's just not something. We're America. We were the great experiment. And look how far we've come. At least we're not where we were in the 1940s or 50s.
Yeah.
How do you have those conversations? And because I don't know that it's even about convincing people at this point. I feel like sometimes when I will bring up facts or things that you can Google and look up, it's still like, well, I just don't know. And I'm like, but you can know. It's just willful ignorance at this point.
Well, I think that there's many issues brought up, but the two are, and I'll take one of them, but the one I won't take is there is this nihilism or this post-truth attitude that's coming into play. And I saw it for the first time this fall when I was teaching, where I had a student and in class, and I asked him a question, and he said something that just wasn't true. And I said, well, like, what evidence do you have for that? And he's like, it's just true. Now, he was not my best student. And I said, well, here's the data, and here's what we know. And I laid it out. He's just like, yeah, I don't believe you. And I was just like, wow, what do you do in that situation? He's like, what evidence do you have? And I was just like, well, I have, the election survey data, and I have this data and this data, and it's corroborated, with 4 different nonprofit organizations. And then, there's multiple case studies that have been written. And he's just like, yeah, no, I don't believe it. And I kind of just let him go, because that's not how I want to spend the class. And having a back and forth with him wasn't going to advance knowledge in the class. But I thought, here's a kid who's going to go through life, right, thinking there is no truth, and it's just whatever you personally believe, and I believe this, and therefore I'm right. So that's a whole other conversation. But what was this? What was
I was just asking, how do you continue the conversation?
Oh.
How do you have the conversation when you're having a conversation with someone whose reality isn't based in truth, and you're trying to sort of penetrate,
And you were also talking about, so there's two facts that are true. Since January 2025, the United States, our democracy has declined faster than any advanced industrialized democracy ever. So actually, democracy tends, when it declines, doesn't decline that fast. Viktor Orban came into power in 2010. He didn't really change the constitution until maybe 2014.
Even Maduro. I mean, he was there for a while.
I mean, it takes a while for these guys to roll back democracy. And these are not particularly strong democracies.
Right.
What's been so shocking about the United States is that Trump has been able to roll back elements. There have been elements that have remained strong, but he's rolled back freedom of speech. He's rolled back free and fair elections. He's rolled back constraints on executive power. So there's certain things that he has targeted and has effectively weakened significantly and very, very quickly. But the thing I would tell people when they say something like that is oftentimes they have this vision of different types of governments. And in their mind, there's really two big types of governments. They're democracies and they're autocracies or dictatorships, right? And, the US for most of our history was this full, healthy democracy. We could talk about the fact that
couldn't vote.
People couldn't vote.
And they were slaves.
And they were slaves. Yeah. But, compared to most democracies around the world, the United States was this full, healthy, liberal democracy. And then they think about autocracies and they think, well, that's the China's, the Bahrain's, the Saudi Arabia's of the world, or the North Koreas, right? And I think in most Americans' minds, they're like, we are so far from North Korea. Like, don't tell me that, dictatorship is imminent, because we are so far from that. And they are correct.
Well, I think I will say my generation, it was the comparison to Saddam Hussein.
Oh, this is Sir Iraq.
It was just like, well, we're not there. So.
The mistake they make, and what I would tell them is there's many different types of governments, and there's really three types. There's full democracies, there's full autocracies, and then there's this middle zone of partial autocracies, partial democracies. Fareed Zakaria called them illiberal democracies. Some people call them hybrid regimes. They're this middle zone. And, okay, I'm going to try to balance my wine.
You want me to just hold it?
No. And if you look at all sorts of bad things happen, if you look at countries that have political instability, economic instability, social instability, and violence, there's this inverted U-shaped curve where it's low on the full autocracy side, it's low on the full democracy side, and most of the instability and the violence happens in the middle. So when people are like, what you're saying is hyperbolic, it's like Chicken Little, I'm not too worried, that's because they're thinking, we don't have to worry until we get to this far end. They don't realize that it's the middle zone we have to really worry about. And the United States, starting in 2025, is solidly in that middle zone. So that's what America needs to be educated about is, losing a little bit of democracy, you think is not that bad a thing. We're not Saudi Arabia. But if you lose a little bit of democracy and then more democracy and more democracy, and then suddenly you're in this middle zone, that is a deeply unstable, deeply volatile place to be. And that's where the United States is today.
So, for me, when I hear that, I think, okay, let's get to work. I think for a lot of people, that might be oh God, like we should lock the doors. I think a lot of people are like, let's go to Walmart and buy as many guns as possible. What are we going to do? But I really do think, as someone who truly believes in the capabilities of this country and the people that I interact with, I do believe that there is a larger mass of people. Maybe they aren't as involved.
Yeah.
And so I guess my plea would be to those groups, and I think that I'm starting to see that even with what's going on in Minneapolis, and it is interesting. It's an interesting dichotomy to go from being a Black person who has experienced for the entirety of their lifetime Black people being brutalized, Black people being oppressed, and now it's starting to shift towards white people, that treatment. And so for me, I'm like, okay, it's weird because it feels like a new woke is about to happen. And it's gonna happen with white people.
Yeah. I actually think that might be the great silver lining in all of this. Black people know how to protest. Yes. Black people know how to peacefully resist. Martin Luther King and the whole civil rights leadership showed Black people how to do that in an incredibly effective way. Mm-hmm. That was one of the most successful peaceful resistance movements in history. The Irish Catholics modeled their movement on it. South Africans modeled their movement on it. It's like a master class in how a weak, oppressed minority can use peaceful resistance to get reform, successfully get reform. White people in the United States have never had experience with that. We have never. Now, again, I understand the civil rights movement had a broader. It wasn't just Black Americans. There were white Americans and lots of Jewish Americans, but the heavy lifting was done by the Black community. Mm-hmm. The white community here in the United States has never had any reason to protest because, we have been privileged. And so the big question is, will white Americans go out in the street and will they demand their rights? Will they demand reform? Will they actually fight to keep their democracy? And I do think one of the big silver linings of what's happening today is that white Americans are getting their own master class in what it feels like to be targeted, what it feels like to lose rights, and they're being forced to figure out how our system works, right? They're being forced to figure out how power is divided in this country and what rights they have, and can the president really nationalize elections? And if the president says he's going to run for a third term, does he actually have the power to do that? So we're being forced to learn about our political system. And we're learning about how to peacefully protest, which is what the amazing people of Minnesota did. Like you couldn't have picked a better set of Americans to target because they are solid, they are tough, they are principled, they are neighborly. Minnesotans are going to show us how you get this done. And once white Americans have that knowledge, they're not going to forget it. So
and I will say with that, I feel like part of that knowledge is the knowledge of knowing it is okay to be extremely uncomfortable. It is okay to feel like you are in pain, like you don't know how you're going to take your next breath or your next step. That is something that Black people have known for so long.
And like white people, I just think we're deeply uncomfortable. Many of us are deeply uncomfortable with conflict, with confrontation. We're very polite. We tend to be very orderly. And we're going to have to learn to step outside that comfort zone. And I guess if we're going to end on something, I would say I think white Americans need to get sort of mentally prepared for what it's going to look like to go out in the street with your little placard and your comfy sneakers and your mom capris and your bunch of flowers or your goofy little frog outfit, whatever it is. Like we're gonna start to get mentally prepared that we're gonna have to actually take action. And this will be very good for us, and we will take this with us the rest of our life, and our democracy will be stronger for it.
And I will say, just as we had allyship from white people during our movements, not all of them,
yeah,
we are happy to be there in solidarity.
I know, of course
and
you are.
To support.
But you should not be on the front
No,
lines.
for sure.
We need to be on the
but
front
I mean,
lines.
honestly, here's the thing. When you're trying to figure out how to do this going forward, go to people who have been through it.
Yeah.
Ask them how they were strategic,
Yeah.
how they organized, who they reached out to in leadership.
Yeah.
Those are things that are critical, because if you just have a movement where there's no organization, where there's no leadership, where there's no mission statement, it's all going to be for naught. It's going to be a mess.
Yeah.
And so I would just recommend to everyone, I mean, I think about, I kind of compare it to even mothering. It's like when someone's going to become a new mom, they go to their mom or their grandmother or, to ask for advice because they've been through it.
Yeah.
So I would say anyone who is getting ready to get on the front lines, go talk to people who have already been there, who have done it and who have survived it.
Yeah. And there's great resources and nonprofits that and we could maybe put, if people are interested, we could put it in the chat. Is there a chat or comments?
I don't know.
I don't know.
We'll figure this out. We'll put it somewhere.
Yeah. And they're great, they're really great books that, America does have a long history of resistance. It's just that most white Americans don't have experience. And it's a very good muscle to flex.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us for another episode, and we will see you next time.